Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast for Wednesday, April the 3rd. I'm your host, Eastn Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We are also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. Ladies and gentlemen, it is draft month. We are in April, and you can follow me on social media at Eastn Freeze, by the way. I'm joined, as always, by producer JT. You can follow on social media at JT_Ruhnke. JT, like I said, it's draft month. Are we stoked? It's time for us to actually talk about some guys that are going to be off the board in real life soon and not just hypothetically.
I know. I'm so excited. The only thing I'm not excited for is that on my weekend off here this Easter weekend, I got sick. So that is not cool. We're starting draft month, a little under the weather, trying to get over that. But like Carthon said today, their free agency plan has basically run its course for the most part. So now it's all on to the draft, baby. And that's the most exciting thing now. Dane Brugler's The Beast comes out in 8 days. So a lot of reading to be done in the next, in 8 days. Get ready to learn PDFs, buddy, because that's going to be a long one. But no, I'm super excited to get into this draft content. We've been already this week publishing and posting a lot of draft content. So I'm so excited.
Your body's just playing the long game. Get sick now so that you have antibodies that last you the rest of the month. So that we can grind. Which is intelligent on your part. So well done. We've got a lot to talk about today that's not necessarily draft related, but the Titans kind of did us a favor today, giving us a really gentle transition, I think, from free agency to the draft, because that's essentially what they came out in the form of Carthon at the podium and said today they are going to be doing from now on. They've not shut the door on free agency, of course, but they are transitioning as a team, as a front office, from free agency grind to draft grind, and free agency is put on the back burner for a little bit. And that's exactly what we're doing here on the Hot Read Podcast for the next, 28th, the first day of the draft, 27th, 25-ish days.
We got 23 days until the...
Oh, goodness. We have less time than I thought. Okay, 23 days to do a lot of things. And so we will start there today, but a lot to cover in today's show. Sneed is now a Titan officially. He was at the podium today. I was supposed to be there and wasn't. I'll explain that in just a second. We also, like I said, heard from Carthon. And then I want us to cover some precursor draft things. JT, you wrote an article earlier this week, came out today, right? Yeah, it came out today, this morning, about a draft thought for the Titans in the first round. I wanted to pick your brain on that article. And then I've got some thoughts about so some flags in this draft that I am planting, some flag plants on my part about 3 weeks out here. So we will get to all of that, but let's start at the top with Sneed's press conference. He is now a Titan. Now, I was supposed to be there at 11:30 Central Standard Time today, and I left my house in time to get to St. Thomas Sports Park on a normal day in the afternoon, in 10-15 minutes to spare time, plenty of time to get there and be there on time with a little bit of a cushion. And then the weather just ruined me. I was halfway there and it started to rain. And the moment it started to rain, everybody on the interstate acted like the sky was falling and traffic just came to essentially a standstill. And I would have ultimately gotten in there right as it was ending, which I was annoyed about at first when Sneed was at the podium, because it's I'm missing Sneed. That's a big, that's a big one, but it's okay, not the end of the world. And then Carthon decides to unannounced get up there and just give kind of a free agency State of the Union address, which then I was furious that I missed that and we didn't know that was going to happen. And so thanks a lot to the fine people of Nashville for not knowing how to drive in the rain. I guess next time I need to just check the weather and leave twice as early as I don't know. Very frustrating, but luckily, it was on the internet, so I watched it just like you all watched it, and we have some thoughts, some general takeaways from Sneed's press conference, JT. Just some notes I had jotted down. He mentioned how he feels the familial connection in the building already with the Titan staff, with Carthon, with his new coaches. The money for him, his new big contract, he was asked about if that changes, and with the money situation locked down, where does the chip come from? How does that affect the chip on your shoulder, the drive to be great? And he emphasized, hey, it's not about the money for me. The money gets my family set up. It gets them right. And that's, a worry off of my back. But in terms of being great on the football field, the money's not what it's about as much as me loving the game and wanting to be the best. So that's, what you want to hear. Obviously, he says, being able to just erase the best receiver on the field, which is what the Titans went out and hired him to do. He is one of the best erasers in the league, for lack of a better term. in the secondary. If you want the opponent's number one receiver shut down, he is one of 5, 6 cornerbacks in the league who you can week in and week out uh, consistently rely upon to do that and do a good job of doing that. And so he talked about how he loves being able to do that and just make it easier on the rest of the team, eliminate the number one threat on the field, let everybody else worry about all the other guys. Not a big rah-rah leader, which I think you kind of got from him. That seemed to be the vibe he conveyed in the press conference. JT, did you get that feeling? He didn't seem, he was not somebody that was, it was very different from Calvin Ridley press conference, for example, where they're, a long-winded response, taking the answer where they want it to go. I guess he's a man of fewer words and of more actions is kind of how he came across to me in his first press conference.
That's what I was about to say. I think he lets his actions on the field speak for it. And I feel like that's what you get with a lot of big name, big time players, right? You find that outside of maybe the wide receiver position, because if you are a wide receiver, you're just going to yap by nature. That's kind of built into you, I think.
Right.
But
Right.
for a lot of other star positions, I think they normally just allow their actions on the field to speak louder than the words. And I think for L'Jarius Sneed, right, he's not, you're not bringing him in to be that number one leader on your team. You're looking for the results more than anything. And if he can be in the room to help his fellow teammates out, I think that's a plus, but you're mainly looking for the outcome on the field.
And there are already guys on this defense that fill that role, right? Like, Jeffrey Simmons, pretty vocal leader, has been for this team for a long time now. That's not an archetype in the locker room that they're necessarily lacking. And so I don't mean to bring that up as a negative. I don't think either of us are saying that. It's just the different kind of guy. He talked a lot about how last year he improved upon his flexibility in the backfield. And that's another thing that the Titans obviously are bringing him in to be able to do. They have dealt with the past couple of seasons having a shuffled deck of cornerbacks in their backfield from week to week at times, having a different group of guys they have to run out there. And that presents difficulties if you've got guys that really only can play a certain position or their production declines significantly when asked to move into a different situation than they are best utilized in. And so to have a guy like Sneed who can play left side, can play right side, can shadow a guy throughout a game if need be in all three X, Y, and Z positions for the receiver to line up in, including the slot, which he was used in the nickel last year, pretty much for the first time consistently in his career. Said that he was thrown in there by Steve Spagnuolo over there with the Chiefs and essentially was told to just figure it out. And he went in there and just figured it out. And now that's something that he's comfortable doing. And so to have a pure, true three-tool player like that when it comes to wide receiver coverage, locking down a receiver when needed, that's really valuable to a Titans team that, they've got a much better cornerback group. We love that it's Cheeto and Sneed and Roger McCreary as the top three. That's a fantastic top three. But really, with any cornerback group, you have to understand it's not the most durable position in the league, and you're liable to need some guys to shuffle around as the season goes on. Having a guy like Sneed out there capable of doing that, it is an underrated benefit to have that on your team.
Yeah, no, I think so as well. And like you said, I think that brings up an interesting point as well, right? You kind of already in the secondary have some more vocal leaders. I think you look at Elijah Molden and Roger McCreary are already two guys who kind of stepped up in the wake of the Kevin Byard trade last year. I think that was a big thing for them. And then also I think part of the Cheeto acquiring him in free agency was that it's a new coach, right? You have to build a different culture that you want to build. And I think Chidobe Awuzie is going to be a big part of that because he knows Brian Callahan so well and can convey that message maybe better than maybe bringing in L'Jarius Sneed from a rival team can, right?
No, I agree. Just continuing to truck along here, because I think the real meat of what we learned today from the Titans came from Rand Carthon. Nothing, again, against L'Jarius Sneed, but just kind of hearing a lot of the things we already knew about him, and we'll learn more about him as we actually see some action from him in the training camp in the summer. But along those lines, something that when he was signed, got excited about was, some of these training camp matchups, secondary versus wide receivers. It might be cinema out there for the Titans in August. Little Little Calvin Ridley versus L'Jarius Sneed on the outside. Little DeAndre Hopkins versus Chidobe Awuzie. Little Roger McCreary, Braylon Burks, rookie receiver. That the undercard doesn't quite match up to the main event, but still, the point being, I think that's an exciting element of this team now. And he was asked about Calvin Ridley, and he said that last year when they faced each other, they had words already, and he is looking forward tremendously to working with and working against in practice a guy like Calvin Ridley, because these were his words. I'll make sure I get this quote right. Nobody runs routes like Calvin Ridley is something that came out of L'Jarius Sneed's mouth today. That's not something that I think is shocking when you know about Calvin Ridley and watch his tape and know what he's about. But to hear that kind of respect from a top flight cornerback in the league, and we heard it kind of echoed from Rand Carthon later on in this press conference, the idea that, hey, Rand shared a story about how when they were courting DeAndre Hopkins last year, he was out in Arizona practicing with a lot of these guys, Deebo Samuel and Calvin Ridley, and a bunch of top flight receivers in the league. D-Hop was, and they heard that all of those guys just were constantly stealing tricks from Calvin, stealing little things, and you watch him on tape. He is one of the better separators in the entire NFL, the way that at his big size, and I'm not in any way comparing him to a Julio Jones as a player. I'm about to sort of, but not in terms of greatness. But the big thing about Julio in his prime, and JT, you as somebody that has followed the Falcons a long time, you know this. What made him one of one when he was really cooking dudes in the late 2010s was that he was running routes in the way that you saw guys Kyle Phillips size run them, like a Hunter Renfrow comeback, 10-yard comeback, where you shake the defender, they're out of their shoes 5 yards past you, trying desperately to come back to the ball, and they just can't hang. Except he was doing it at 30 pounds heavier and 4 inches taller than the guys you typically see do that. There is an element of that to Calvin Ridley, and particularly certain routes where he just has a mastery as a not quite Julio Jones sized player. Don't get me wrong. Calvin Ridley, I think he's like just shy of 200 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. 6'2", so I can be making that up. Let me double check that. But he is I'd say a medium-sized receiver in the league, but he's able to run routes like a more gadget type of guy is, and gets that separation that you don't quite expect from a guy his size. And that's something that I think you're going to see with the Titans this year, and something that if L'Jarius Sneed is recognizing that out of the gate, that's a promising thing for the Titans, mainly because they've not had a guy that can separate at all on their wide receiver core for a while now.
It definitely gives also the Will Levis's ability to kind of throw that deep ball as well, and kind of finally be able to utilize that part of his game any single play that they want to. Anytime they're on the field, they can try to use that ability between Will Levis's arm and Calvin Ridley, right, as well on that one. I think that's a huge buff in a plus there for Calvin Ridley being on this team. And then on the other side of it, shutting down these corners, L'Jarius Sneed shutting down these wide receivers on the other side of the ball here is something that the Titans have not been able to do for a long time. I can count maybe 4 or 5 times last season where when we're previewing a game, the main thing we're talking about is how in the world are the Titans going to stop the number 1 receiver on this team? You look at maybe against with Tyreek Hill.
I was going to say it was the Dolphins game last
year.
The
Dolphins game was definitely the biggest one in my mind.
Monday Night Football, and Tyreek Hill is going to have 700 yards against the secondary.
And that's a big thing that you really don't have to worry about anymore with a L'Jarius Sneed. Now that's assuming that he's going to be able to play every single game. And he had some really interesting thoughts on his knee situation today in his press conference, and the how he feels about that.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in just a second. I'm fact checking myself here on Ridley, and this is kind of a hand up, a little bit of an aha moment for me. I guess I never quite knew what he was listed at. He's listed at 6'1", 190, which is a fine receiver size, but actually a hair below average in terms of size. And I've seen him in person. He came across to me when I shook his hand a little bit bigger than that. But the numbers are the numbers. Maybe I just got that impression that he's a little bit of a slightly bigger bodied receiver based on the way that he plays, because he does have that play style where he can play the true X He can win at the top of the route. He can win at the catch point. He can win contested catches. So yeah, okay, not plays bigger maybe than he actually is, but I think my point still stands that he is able to separate like a true gadget guy in any of the positions on the formation is the word I'm looking for. Okay, so the knee, like you said, that was the biggest, really the only primary concern with L'Jarius Sneed coming in for the Titans. Has dealt with some knee things as a rookie on his rookie contract rather with the Chiefs, and he gave a response that was a resounding "my knee is fine. It ain't nothing wrong with my knee" was his message over and over in the press conference when asked about it on the Titans with Mike Keith in the Titans specific media interview on the I saw on the radio on 102.5. He said that the knee is fine. Don't worry. I'm sure if and when he goes on 104.5, he'll say the same thing. So that's good. And I don't think that's something that we were super concerned about. But then he was asked by Teron Davenport about, so is it a management thing? Is it one of those deals where you're just having to do things throughout the week and maybe miss a couple practices or be a little bit easier on it during certain times of the year, take it easy, load manage a little bit, or certain treatment necessary for a certain need because of the situation health-wise? And he started his answer by saying no. And I saw a number of folks running with that answer. It's like, oh, the answer is no. He does not have to do that. I caution against running with the no, because immediately after the no, he then said, I know how to, excuse me, he said, I know what to do with my knee, which that's management like that, which is fine. That's perfectly fine. It's not a big deal. DeAndre Hopkins admitted last year in training camp about how his ankle or foot, he's got plantar fasciitis. Yes, there's something with his foot or his ankle. I need to jog my memory on that, where it's just the way that it is. It's a chronic thing where he just has to deal with that and, take a day off here or there to limit the mileage, increase recovery time. But in general, when it comes to practice during the week on the whole, and then on Sundays when it matters most, not an issue. And I went back and forth online with Justin Churchill, an acquaintance, a friend of mine on social media, who is a AFC West beat reporter. So he covers the Chiefs in part for A to Z Sports. And he said while he was on the injury report a lot in Kansas City, he almost always played. And as someone who has covered them closely since he was drafted, I never noticed it hindering his game, especially not last season, which is something we've heard kind of consistently. And that's from what we've read from folks in that media market covering his health and his past couple of seasons. It has sounded like that is something that he, again, manages. Let's not hide the ball here. Something he has to manage, but he does it well, and he keeps it from being a hindrance really at all, which is the message that he gave today, I think. And Churchill responded, no, I think a lot of it, and this is where it might get interesting for you, JT. He said a lot of it has to do with what I think is a great medical staff in Kansas City. I'm not familiar with the Titans medical staff, whether or not they have a good reputation or not, but even so, he should be fine. Like you said, management is the key. So one, confirmation from somebody that has covered him with the Chiefs. It seems to be a management situation, which good to know. Fine. No big deal. The medical staff part is something. Titans, of course, just went through and changed a lot of the composition, but beefed up, doubled the size of their strength and conditioning training staff. That's not quite the medical, there's this different medical staff that's actually doctors, but they go hand in hand. And I don't know, how does that element of it concern you a little bit? That maybe he won't have quite the same level of care here, but perhaps he knows so well how to take care of it, he can come and bring his own regimen with him.
I was going to say, I don't think I'm as concerned about that part because of the exact same DeAndre Hopkins kind of parallel that we just kind of went back to and referenced, right? I think he was very confident, A, in the health of his knee, and B, how to take care of it. I don't think that's something that he won't have access here to. It's not like the medical staff has been, or maybe it has, I don't know. But I would think it would be hard to imagine that the things that the Kansas City medical team can provide, the Titans cannot get their hands on the same things that L'Jarius Sneed knows he needs for his knees, or DeAndre Hopkins needs for his ankles, right? So I think that's more of a thing maybe with other players, but if you have these kind of more chronic injuries, right, I think it's more of, if they know how to take care of it, they're going to take care of it, and that it would be hard for a different medical staff to be the main reason for it.
And D-Good pointing out here, yeah, I believe D-Good has told me, I could be wrong on this. I think D-Good is an athletic trainer. So he's standing up for his profession, saying we are looking to say athletic trainers. Yes, that's what we're essentially saying. The medical team of trainers on the team that deal with all of these things is who we are referencing. All right, that's kind of it on Sneed. Any other thoughts, JT, or should we move on?
I mean, he had drip on. His drip was
We
very
didn't
good.
even. Maybe we buried the lead there. He was wearing a jacket that was a looker. I was a
And I
fan.
forgot, I totally forgot I put the I put the different prompts in here for it, so I got to put it up here because
There it
now
is.
you can
Okay,
see it.
there we go. And we
I
can see a
totally
little bit of
forgot
that
I put
jacket.
this in here and meant to put it on, but now you can see it. So
Well, that's a perfect
there you go.
transition because before we get to the Ran Carthon portion of today's show, I want to encourage everybody listening with us live today. First of all, thank you for being here live and not just listening in post. Listening in post is fine, and I'm glad that you can do that at your convenience, but listening live is very helpful. Justin Churchill in the comment, we were just speaking about you, Justin. That's crazy. He says Sneed is going to be crazy for y'all. Gonna miss him. Justin, appreciate you and your insight today on L'Jarius Sneed. But if you're with us live, like Justin is, and like D Good is, and like Derek and Hawkins all are, do us a couple of favors. First of all, if you're watching on Twitter or on Facebook, that's great. But I've got an even better recommendation for you. Go on over to YouTube and find Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. It's Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Find this live stream there. And in the comment section, you can join Justin and D Good and Derek and Hawkins and others in today's conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions. While you're there, hit subscribe on YouTube. It's free to you to hit subscribe. It just takes one click. It's very helpful to us to get those numbers up as much as possible. So hit subscribe, hit the like button, because again, that's free as well. And it's helpful to us. The whole algorithm, all these internet things that I don't fully understand, help us out on those. And then while you're at it, tell a friend about the show. Okay. Usually I say send the link to a friend, hit share, hit retweet, hit like, do those things. But next time you're talking with your buddy, if they're a fan of the Titans, if they're a fan of the NFL draft, if they're a fan of sports in general, say, hey, I listened to this pod. It's a video show, actually. It's on YouTube. I think you'd enjoy it. Tell them about the show. Be a friend, tell a friend. We got a couple articles out, by the way, JT. You mentioned earlier. We've got 2 out so far this week between the two of us. You've got one more coming out tomorrow, which we will tease. You got a mock draft, Titans mock 1.0 coming from you. Going to go through all 7 rounds of the Titans first first through 7th. There we go. 7 rounds of the Titans draft in 2024 and give some thoughts on who they should draft where, when, and why. I had my mock draft 1.0 come out on Monday, which included the entire first round of the NFL draft with a couple thousand words on the different prospects. If you want to learn about guys and see potential fits, I recommend giving that a read. And then I went through my own version of the Titans 7 round mock where I gave them 8, 9, 10 players. Let's see. They came away in that first haul with my mock draft with 2 offensive linemen, 2 pass rushers, 2 linebackers, a wide receiver, and a safety. So go check that out. See who I chose for them with a couple thousand words of explanation on those guys. And then JT, in a minute here, we're going to talk about what you wrote today about Malik Neighbors, a top 3 receiver in this class, a top 2 according to many, and according to some, a top 1 receiver in this class. Somebody that if the Titans had the opportunity of drafting him at 7, many folks would be very fond of that idea. You wrote an article saying perhaps not so fast, my friend. So I'm going to get your thoughts on that in a second. But let's start with some Carthon press conference news here. And there were 3 main takeaways from this impromptu presser from Ran Carthon that I want us to address. Now, first of all, this first general takeaway was partially because of what he said and partially because of the fact that he got up to speak in the first place. Ran Carthon is not a guy in his time with Tennessee so far who just jumps up there unannounced. And so for him to do this, that signals, I think, to everybody, hey, this phase of our offseason is over. We are transitioning to draft talk, draft discussion, draft research. And so that's the number one takeaway here is that they are not necessarily as a team done in free agency. And like we've said on the show, they kind of can't be. They need more bodies places. But for now, they are focusing on the draft and they're going to spend all of April getting ready for that and then probably addressing free agency in more depth camp bodies ways in May and into the summer. So that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is kind of a post-mortem, a recap on the Calvin Ridley and L'Jarius Sneed moves the Titans made. He gave long-winded versions of the story on both of those guys, which are worth listening to, and I recommend going and listening to the videos from the press conference on what he had to say on these guys. But the general takeaway was that the two biggest additions in their offseason weren't exactly a part of the plan going in, so much as they were just situations that ended up working out for the Titans. And with Sneed and with Ridley, for different reasons, both kind of fell into their laps, not without having to work for them, but they weren't guys that they came in January and February saying, top of our to-do list, L'Jarius Sneed, cornerback, Kansas City Chiefs, Calvin Ridley, wide receiver, Jacksonville Jaguars. They're going to be Titans. I want to talk about whether or not that is encouraging to you. And the only instance of them alluding to Ridley being a potential part of their plans from the get-go was that apparently they had as Carthon referenced it, an Avengers Assemble style plan with the Titans potentially going out and getting Ridley on top of keeping Azeez Al-Shaair at linebacker and keeping Danico Autry on the defensive front. That ultimately, in their opinion, was going to be too expensive. They said that they wouldn't have enough money to sign their draft class and to make any moves in the middle of the season, which is not necessarily true on paper, but it all is according to what their budget is and how much money they want to have left over after the draft and how much cap they want to carry over all these things, which we're not privy to. But the idea that they didn't plan on these guys happening and it just kind of came together in the heat of the moment, I can see a glass half full or a glass half empty way of looking at that. But I want to get your thoughts first, JT. Does that encourage or discourage you in terms of good or bad process for the Titans?
See, I think it's fine process, right? It's you had them on your mind, right? They are out there, but I think Rand Carthon is a guy who has built his entire front office here on relationships, right? And I think that he is a guy who, if the opportunity presents itself, that's when we'll go after it. You know, I think it's a very delicate line that you have to tread, right? Because if you're the opposite way and you have a plan and you have to just stick to that plan, and that's the only thing that you can do, right? I think that's also could be considered bad process. So it's a little bit of both. And I think for the Titans, they've played this one perfectly, where they had a plan in mind with some of these guys like Lloyd Cushenberry and Chidobe Awuzie. But then you have opportunities that are too good to pass up, or you have to play a certain way, and that is with L'Jarius Sneed and Calvin Ridley. And so I think that they've done a really good job of balancing that line there and going that way. On the Azeez Al-Shaair and Danico Autry part, I think that was most likely a little bit too far to that, where they had a plan and they're going to try to stick to that plan. And then when it falls apart, that's where you start to look at it, which I think was really interesting, calling those three particular players the Avengers Assemble moment.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't know about that. Is that like
I was gonna ask you if you had to put three Avengers to those guys. I don't know if you would make a good movie out of that. I feel like it's like a Spider-Man and a like Wong from the Doctor Strange, and then maybe like the Winter
Captain
Soldier,
Marvel?
like Bucky. Or
no,
Captain,
you're just too good. Captain Marvel. No,
I don't know, like something like that. I don't know if you could make a movie about that.
Well, it's funny when you mentioned that. What popped into my mind was I was at Universal a couple weeks ago, and I was there. Long story short, I was there with my wife is a full-time nanny for a family here in Nashville, and we went with them on spring break to Universal, and so we were there with the little boy that she nannies, who's 4 years old, and there was at Universal they still technically own some of the rights to Marvel, but it's the old school comic Marvel, so it's like Captain America, but with like the weird hat with the little wings on his head, like old school properties. And so there was like a Avengers meet and greet with like mixed with some X-Men in there, and we walked up and it was like old school Captain America, old school Wolverine, and then a bunch of other superheroes that like I recognized, but I couldn't tell you their name. And the little boy, his name's Sully, he's like, hey, like, who are the other guys? He was whispering, he's like, who's that? And I was like, brother, I'm not exactly sure. Like I know the Marvel universe relatively well, but I'm not sure who these cats are. That's kind of what that Avengers version would be, I suppose.
I get the idea, right? But I just didn't know. I was like, it made me pop into my head. I was like, that is the weirdest version of the Avengers I probably could ever see in my entire life. But getting back to the point here, they balanced the line very well, and they had a plan. It maybe didn't go to plan because Houston just kind of made both of them offers they couldn't refuse to poach
Sure.
them from their AFC South rival, and that's probably a part of it, right? Going from
Yes.
one team to another rival team, they probably had to overpay, and that's what they did because they just decided to load up on every single defensive player this year.
Well,
But
and Rand mentions that it's, hey, not only does it suck to lose them, but it really sucks to have to play them twice a year
yeah,
from now on.
and so I think their ability to pivot on every single which way and keep their options open is something that Rand Carthon brings to this team that I think has been different in a lot of other previous years.
So it's interesting, right? Because on the surface, this is the kind of thing that you hear, and you wouldn't be shocked at all as a Titans fan to see somebody in the national media get a hold of it and turn it into a bit where it's like, hey, it's not a great process. Handing out market correcting contracts in free agency to guys that you just kind of on a whim, like impulse purchased a little bit, like when you go and make a big time purchase, it's something you want to be thinking about and planning about, and you've got it budgeted out, and you've thought about this, you've slept on it, and you go and you make a calculated move. You don't want when your buddy gets a new car, and you're like, man, I didn't know you were even thinking about getting a new car. And he's like, just kind of went to the dealership one day and they gave me a good offer, so I said, where do I sign? I don't know about that, Chief. So like that's a little bit concerning on that front. If you want to look at it glass half empty in terms of process, because this all circles back to the general idea, which I think we're going to be talking about throughout this offseason, JT. We've talked about it so far. Hey, we clown all the time on these teams that make big spending sprees in free agency and win free agency, how it historically it very, very rarely works out. How is this different? And how can Titans fans not just cope their way to justifying it? Well, this time's different. It's different because they're the team that I like. Okay, what's a better answer than that? Or maybe there isn't a better answer than that. And so let's get to the bottom of that. And so, along those lines, I think if you're looking for how is this different? What about this process is different? You could argue glass half full. Hey, they were addressing free agency from a value standpoint, not rushing into contracts, deals with guys that they had on their wish list, on their shopping list, and they let the deals come to them, right? With L'Jarius Sneed. Carthon asked today about how, why didn't it come together earlier than it did? And he just says it was logistics, man. It was money. L'Jarius himself was asked today about how he was reportedly wanting $22 million a year to reset the cornerback market, wanted to be the number one highest paid cornerback in the league. And he was open and said, I did because I felt like I deserved to be paid the highest of any cornerback in the league based on what I did last year, which is a fair and honest answer. And he essentially says we settled at 19 instead of 22. And, I alludes to the fact that, hey, we're fine. We figured it out. And the guarantee situation, like, I'm good. Well, I got what I wanted. So there's that element of they weren't forcing the issue with some of these guys, and they saw opportunities and took them instead of created opportunities in their head and shoved that square peg into a round hole. Does that make sense? That's the glass half full element of this, I think.
I definitely think so. That it's not like I think you can think back to the way the Jaguars did it with the Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, and I think that's more of a example of them doing it just to do it. There's no way that that deal came to them and they make that deal.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't the Kirk signing? It was early on in free agency, right? It was one of the first wide receiver moves in
you can argue cycle. It was the wide receiver move that has now snowballed affect us to the point that we are today, that every contract kind of has to be like that. So maybe you can think of them as the founding fathers of this situation and how that has worked out for them. You can, I mean, you can look at it a couple different ways, but it hasn't worked out to maybe the fullest of its abilities. So having the opportunities come to you, I think, I'm with you there. You can look at it as being a different way for them to spend this money, but also be smart about it.
Yeah. And so with Ridley and with Sneed, obviously guys that were brought in relatively big. I mean, and Sneed's not, that's different. It's a trade. It's not a free agency acquisition, but still these big acquisitions that are made late in the free agency cycle, the glass half full element of that is they didn't force it. They didn't rush. They made sure it was right for them. And then they made it happen. the third. So those are the first two takeaways from Carthon's presser, right? Moving on from free agency to the draft. Sneed and Ridley, biggest additions, weren't necessarily part of the plan so much as just situations that worked out for the best for all parties involved. Number three is the draft theme, and there was a lot of allusions, and this is kind of a reaction to today, but also an aggregation of all the things that we have heard from Rand Carthon so far this offseason, whether it was at the draft or at the owners' meetings or today's presser. The theme for this team in the draft seems pretty clear to me that it is going to be the trenches and the defense. And some examples of why I feel that way. Carthon was asked today about how, moving on from free agency, starting on the draft, you still got some significant holes on defense, up front, on the edge, at linebacker, at safety. Really, only the cornerback position is set in stone so far, and a comfortable, a comfortable, more than comfortable situation in terms of roster ability. But the rest is a work in progress. And so he was asked, is that something you want to do address in the draft, later in free agency? Are you at the point where you're just kind of accepting you're not going to be perfect everywhere? And his answer was a strong no. We still want to build out a complete defense. And he said, we're looking to add guys up front. We are looking to add some line. He's alluded to the past couple of times he's spoken, linebacker. That's a thing in the draft we are considering with significance. And so it seems to me, JT, based on his comments as a whole this offseason, I think his philosophy and Rand Carthon and Brian Callahan's philosophy on this is throughout this rebuild process, maybe we can, and maybe this is me going too deep on this, so I want you to give me your thoughts. Maybe we can kill two birds with one stone here. We can figure out Levis now. We can figure out if he is the franchise guy. We can check that number one priority box this offseason and fix the long-term secondary issues that this team has had for a couple of seasons now. We can do that in free agency. We can set those two things up for success. That's an immediate fix. But then in terms of the draft and building young and actually rebuilding a slow and meticulous and intentional way that you'd expect a rebuild to go to get it done right, you build from the inside out, right? You focus on the trenches on either side of the ball. You get young on the offensive line, on the defensive line, and you build out that way so that you have a firm foundation for the team that you're building. And that's more of a long-term play. If that's the idea, and that's what I think that they're alluding to, I am very on board with that. I think that is a good and a smart thing to do. So two questions for you, JT. One, is that the impression that you're getting? Maybe it's not. And two, is that a wise thing to do, or is that a little bit too much dip on their chip?
The first question there, I think I would be a hypocrite if I said that that's what I think they're doing, because as I've written today about Malik Neighbors, I don't think that's the way they should go with their first overall pick. And then just maybe creeping into my mind for the mock draft 1.0 I'm putting together, I think I'm thinking along those lines. I may or may not be putting 5 picks into the offense and defensive line of the draft.
I love it.
And going forward. That's where you have to do it, right? You can't just take luxury after luxury after luxury in the NFL draft like you kind of did with free agency. That's just not how it works. They still have to build this team through the depth. And you can look at teams that have won in the past. You can look at that Bucs team when they had Tom Brady. I mean, the depth on that team was a big talking point when they won. The Chiefs for the past 2 years, they have been a deep team. And you kind of see that this past season where that depth starts to play at starter level potential. And that's where they have a really good defense. And you see teams who don't have the depth, like the Eagles, who make that one run and then they falter out. Like, you have to build and continue to build through the draft. And that's something that you just cannot fix time and time again with free agency. Now, like you said, maybe there is too much to still be done that can't be fixed in this draft. And I think that is something that is very true, especially with currently not having a 3rd round pick. I think that's a big sticking point.
And we're going to talk about that, but yeah.
You just, it can't be done unless you want to mortgage even more of your future to get more of these players this year, which I don't think would be a smart thing to do. But I think you can start to address some of the depth problems and then when you look down the line and you answer that question, if Will Levis is the guy or not, that's where you can start to once again use the draft to get some of those playmakers.
So some more details were given from Carthon as to where he's looking to address these different positions in need, whether it be in free agency later on in the offseason or in the draft. He said that safety, the safety position, he strongly indicated that free agency is the situation there. And he talked about how there are a number of quality, capable safeties out on the street right now. And it's a bit of a waiting game at this point, right? That it's just, maybe it's a matter of wanting to let those guys sweat a little bit, wanting to see if those numbers come down a little bit. He's confident that, he seems confident at least, that that's a position they can address in free agency. And then he volunteered an interesting concept, that the idea of the green dot responsibility on defense, the defensive play caller with the comms, doesn't necessarily need to be an inside linebacker at all. Could be a safety, could be an edge player. There's no rule, obviously, that it has to be the inside linebacker. That's just what it tends to be. So that's something to look for as we continue to be like, hey, Kenneth Murray, player, bigger, green dot potential guy. And then your other option is Gibby, Dr. Gibbons, Jack Gibbons,
Otis Reese,
or Otis Reese. Yeah, or Otis Reese. Also kind of an situation, but that does not necessarily have to be the case. You could bring in a Justin Simmons from the Broncos, bring him in as a veteran safety option and make him the green dot. They can play around with that idea. But then he also said, it can be the inside linebacker, and he's not all that concerned about the idea of if they address the linebacker position in the draft, like they've alluded to potentially wanting to do. He's seen firsthand in the past guys that have been able to handle the rookie responsibilities of learning the linebacker position and be the green dot. And he referenced Fred Warner in San Francisco, who he was there for when they drafted him, was the rookie green dot. Now, Warner ended up being a future Hall of Fame player potentially, but the point being, guys are capable of doing that. And as he said, it's less about the player on the field and more about the person and what you think that they can personally handle. You have thoughts on that before we move on?
I was just going to say, I'm with you on that when he talked about, maybe he gave another example as Eric Weddle with the Rams. He was one of the guys who was the green dot guy for him, despite not being an inside linebacker. And then he goes back to the rookie linebacker class, which I think media, like national media, local media, everyone we talked to at the NFL Combine, at the Senior Bowl, this has to be one of the most classic examples of, we are seeing this class different than NFL front offices do, because they continue to time and time again, at least Rand Carthon does, to allude, like you said, to them liking a lot of these guys who are in this class. And I think they're going to come out of this draft with maybe two of them. And so,
well, here's the thing. On day 3, I actually do like a lot of the developmental linebackers. I just, for the purposes of the Titans' needs now, don't like the idea of one of these guys being thrown into the fire as the green dot starting linebacker. That's where you lose me, right? It's not about the quality of the developmental guys, and it's a weaker class at the top, but in terms of depth, it's not all that weak in my opinion. I don't see a ton of guys that you'd want to throw out there, but apparently Rand Carthon, like you're saying, he doesn't see it quite the same way.
Yeah, and so I think there are a few options that you can look at. If they were to spend a day 2 pick on a Peyton Willis or an Edgerrin Cooper, I think that's where you could start to maybe see the possibility of them using him maybe Peyton Willis more so, because he has been the coverage guy for NC State over the past 2 years. So he's probably more familiar with it. But then again, it's a risky operation unless, like in San Francisco, maybe they think this guy's the next Fred Warner, and they have a guy who they think is the next Fred Warner. So it's just going to be a huge gamble if they want to go that path.
You just said Peyton Willis, by the way, not Peyton Wilson, which is funny because
in your head,
it's funny because in your head, you're already assuming he's going to turn into the Hall of Fame player that Willis was, right? So that's
correct,
you're just a little Freudian slip there. Speaking of options, he was asked about the free agent tackle market, and he said, quote, "No, there's still good players out there, players that have played a ton of snaps in this league, but this tackle draft class is pretty deep. So we're going to find the best option for us," which is one of a handful of times this offseason that he has alluded to thinking this draft class is really deep at the tackle position, not just good at the top, but really deep as compared to what you're used to seeing. And he's gone out of his way to make that a point a couple different times. And so people take that to mean different things. I saw a handful of folks, and I didn't see it this way at first, but I can see where you get this. The idea that, hey, they think this class is deep enough that maybe they wait until the 38th pick to draft a tackle. Maybe they move up, whatever it is. Maybe 7 overall is not where they're taking tackle. Their first pick may be a different position. That could be what he's alluding to. To me, that speaks more to the idea that I think they wouldn't mind taking 2 tackles in this class and taking advantage of an abnormally deep tackle class. Tackles are one of the rarest and they are the spice of the NFL world, right? Like it is what makes these engines go, and they are in limited supply. And so when you get a rare draft class with a handful, a nice young crop of lads that can come in and do this job, you don't want to pass that up when you're a team that needs 2 starters for the foreseeable future. You'd love to have 2 franchise guys. You need at least 1. And so to me, I'm in a minute, we're going to talk about things I've been radicalized on with this draft, but I am very close to taking the leap, stepping off the edge and saying this team is going to take 2 tackles in this class, or at least they would really like to take 2 tackles in this class.
Well, certainly, if you add on that they now have a very, very good dynamic duo in Bill Callahan and Scott Fuchs as the 2 main coaches on the offensive line here.
Right.
And this class is so deep. Why wouldn't you want to take 2 or maybe even 2 day 1 and 2 dart throws, and then even maybe a round 7th dart throw or something like that at this tackle class, and see if they can't kind of build these guys up into Pro Bowl caliber players, right? And I think that's an opportunity that they just cannot pass up in this draft.
I could not be a stronger advocate of the idea that if you want to take 2 tackles in this class, go for it, man. If there would be a lot of folks really upset if they went tackle at 7, tackle at 38. I would not be one of those people. I would secretly, quietly, probably not quietly based on my job, but I would be somebody that to myself would be very happy at the draft party about that. And so it brings me around to like another thing that I'm thinking a lot these days. And we talked about it early on in the draft season. I mean, I know on this show, we talked a lot about it as soon as the Titans season ended. Hey, Titans fans, did you see what just happened back there? That was a mess. That was a disaster. It's been that way for 2 years. When we get to April, don't allow yourself in the draft process to get distracted by the sexiness of non-tackle choices. You need tackles so bad. If these past 2.5 years have not been enough to prove to you that this is a desperate, desperate need, I don't know what will. And lo and behold, here we are, and people have like they have fallen for it as they every year we try to convince ourselves it's gonna be fine. It's, you know what it is, JT? Have you ever been on a trip where like a bachelor party or a music festival or a like a wedding weekend where you're with the boys and you got a couple of nights in a row of partying and having a good time, and you're sitting in your office all week long thinking about, oh, it's gonna be so fun, I can't wait for the weekend, we're gonna have a good time. That first night you're just giddy, you go a little too hard, and you wake up the next morning, you're like, dang, I didn't pace myself, I feel like crap. I'm taking it easier tonight. I can't do that again. I feel I can't even fathom the idea of going that hard again. And then flash forward like 8 hours, it's dinner time. You're chowing down. You're like, that 6-pack in the fridge suddenly calling my name. Like, let's run that thing back a little bit. That's where we are in the cycle. Is we have everybody in the Titans fan community. We have gotten over the hangover of the horrendous offensive line situation. And we are now rubbing our hands together like, but a receiver, a big edge acquisition, like that's kind of sexy. That's kind of hot. Snap out of it. Remember what you felt this morning, right? Think back to right after this happened to you and how you felt and how dead set you were on fixing this. And our buddy, friend of the show, Mike Herndon, talking about, he listed out a full list of Pro Bowlers and or All-Pro first or second team guys under the tutelage of Bill Callahan in his illustrious career, the past 16 years. with their draft round and pick in parentheses, right? So here's the list, and he lists all the linemen, including guards and centers that got these honors. But I'm going to point out just the tackles for you, as he did in his tweet. Left tackle D'Brickashaw Ferguson, 4th overall pick. Tackle Tyron Smith, 9th overall pick. Tackle Trent Williams, 4th overall pick. Tackle Jack Conklin, 8th overall pick. All of those tackles that were top guys at their position at the time, they all were picked in not just the first round, but in the top 10. There's something to that. That is, we've talked about it on the show before, man. That's the reality of the league right now. It has been for a long time. It's nothing new, despite our annual attempt to talk ourselves out of it. No position, maybe quarterback, but really statistically, it's arguably even worse than that. No position drops off after the first round so consistently and precipitously like tackle does. That's a fact. And I'm going to, there's an analytic study on this that I will bring for show and tell next time I think about it, but I didn't have time to find it today. If you want a dude, the bottom line is, like, if you need somebody you can bank on and not just hope for panning out, you got to take him first. You got to take him early. And if you got to pick in the top 10, especially in a class like this, you got to do it. And so that's where I'm at on this Titans draft class, and where I'm at with where they should address these different positional needs in the draft, in this draft class in particular. Any thoughts on that before we move on to some draft takes?
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? And we can talk about this in a second here, about it's kind of the crux of the argument between taking a Malik Neighbors or a Joe Alt, right? It's all fun to have the good weapons, right? But if you don't have the guy who can protect Will Levis long enough to use those weapons, what's the point?
Okay, so let's move on. I agree. Let's move on to the draft takes portion of today. I don't know what better to label this, because you have some things you want to say. I have some things I want to say, and then we'll get out of here. First of all, just some reporting from our buddy Justin Mello, who is an NFL insider and is all over these things. Just couldn't spit out the word. The Titans held a virtual meeting with Missouri defensive lineman Darius Robinson, per a team source. Robinson had 8.5 sacks in the SEC this season and possesses great inside-outside versatility. If Robinson is on the board at 38, he could project as an ideal replacement for Danico Autry, which I agree with and I love for the Titans. You and I, our eyes were caught by Darius Robinson at the Senior Bowl. Fans of him and his work with Missouri. He is as versatile as they come on the defensive line in this class, right? You could really play him anywhere along the defensive front. What he lacks in speed, he makes up for with power, is a general thought that I had him drafted. Spoiler, in my mock draft 1.0, I had him as a first-round draft pick, actually, to the 49ers, and this is part of what I wrote up about him. Hey, biggest thing is speed, not always, not elite, but power makes up for it, and then some. He's a rotational floor guy with a 3-down upside. If that's not Danico Autry, man, I don't know what isn't. If he's there at 38 for the Titans, I think that's awesome. I don't think it's likely, but I think a guy like him being added to this team is exactly what they could use.
I agree with you as well. It just, it begs the question, would you, then when you get into that second round, it's between taking him at 238 or maybe moving back a couple picks. And
I don't want that's, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that, because I don't want to answer that question. I don't know.
maybe I'll put you on the spot right here.
Don't maybe make
Would you rather take him at 238 or
right.
move back a couple picks with the potential to still be there? I mean, if you move back 5, 6, 7 spots, would he still maybe be there and you get a late third, or would you just stick and pick and then just kind of suffer the consequences of not having a third round pick?
So that's just for everyone's bookkeeping, keeping up with 30 visits and virtual meetings. I believe that's the first virtual meeting we have confirmation of. Now, JT, as we've mentioned a handful of times on today's show, you wrote an article earlier this week, published this morning, about the Titans' 7th overall pick and what they could potentially be getting themselves into if they were to draft Malik Neighbors. Now, no certainty he's even there at 7, but if he is there, there's going to be a very large contingent of Titans fans clamoring for LSU's Malik Neighbors to be a Tennessee Titan. And you said, not so fast, my friends. Perhaps this is a sexy, but foolish, or maybe foolish is too strong. Sexy, but not quite the wisest move. Talk me through what you wrote and why you think it's maybe not the most wisdom-laden idea.
it's a gamble, right? That is what
Sure.
it is, and I think you can make as many connections as you want to the age old now Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase memes all you want.
Yes.
However,
Yep.
you're lacking your ace in the hole that you
Right.
had when making that gamble. And that gamble was Joe Burrow. You had
Mhm.
Joe Burrow. You knew what you had in your quarterback. And as we've talked about ad nauseum already this offseason, you don't exactly know what you have in your quarterback in Will Levis. Does he make some big time throws? Does he wow you with that cannon of an arm? Yes. But were there more times than not that there were plenty of throws that should have been picked off that you were kind of taking a deep breath and saying,
Right.
wow, that was a very interesting ball to throw there. I think that's something that still needs to be worked out with him. I think
I've
he's
seen a couple
still
of folks this offseason, by the way, being like, I don't know why people think that Will Levis needs to be a little bit less turnover prone. He only had 4 picks last year. It's like, brother, check out
check the
that turnover
tape.
worthy play rate. Check that bad boy out because it
Exactly.
is not great.
I
Yeah.
think he still needs to develop his pocket presence because he really wasn't afforded a pocket whatsoever.
What
So
pocket? Right.
uh, getting a guy like a Joe Alt or Olu Fashanu at 7 would be a nice way, or Fashanu, sorry,
There you go.
to give him that pocket presence, and then in turn allow him to see the field a lot better than he did last season. And I think that's the biggest thing when looking at it. So I went ahead and I did make my own Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase meme, and here's how it goes. I think everybody,
Okay.
since this is a video show, I did not bring it for show and tell
God
for the
damn it.
screen. My bad. I'll put it on Twitter later. But
Everyone's seen it. We know. We've seen it.
we know. So you have Levis being protected by
Mhm.
a Joe Alt or an Olu Fashanu, correct?
Right. Yep.
Your receiver. I may have jumped the shark a little bit here. I may be
Uh-oh.
playing with words a little bit, but
Okay.
I said the receiver would be a revamped offense, right? You have Tony Pollard, you have Tyjae Spears, you have
Mhm.
D Hop and Calvin Ridley, as long with a lot of depth pieces on that offense.
Yep.
So there you go. That is a perfect way to find out what Will Levis is.
Sure.
Or you can move to the other one where Will Levis is still getting tackled a bunch because
Right.
there is a other tackle that you
Uh-huh.
don't know is maybe a surefire bet. And your receiving core is
33-year-old grizzled NFL veteran who will play 4
you can look
games,
at
right?
David Bakhtiari, Charles Leno, Dwayne
Have fun.
Brown, one of those guys, right?
Yep. Yep.
And that's great and all. But the ball is never going to get to a Malik Neighbors, a Tyjae Spears, a Calvin Ridley, a Tony Pollard, a DeAndre Hopkins, a Chigakonkwo, a Traylon Burks, and a Kyle Phillips. What good is having that many weapons if the ball is never going to get to them?
Right.
And so I think that was the main crux of my argument today, and was a fun little thought experiment that I think I wanted to share.
Well, I'm glad you elaborated on why it's not actually your argument was not just based on, well, this is the Chase and Sewell meme all over again, because everybody points to the Chase and Sewell meme and says, hang on, the Bengals picked the receiver and they weren't unhappy about that. Your point being, what makes it different, Joe Burrow was not he was not the X variable in that situation. He was the constant. He was the control. That's not what you're doing here with Tennessee. You're trying to set up a control situation for Will Levis, and it's the player you're bringing in that is being a part of that and is not the variable, right? And so, yes, I think you're 100% right. If you're wanting to set up Will Levis for success and to find out what he is, throwing some resources, big time resources at the protection department is a big necessary thing. So I think that's a good point, and is an article that ultimately I read it and I came away with the general crux of your point being Malik Neighbors stinks and the Titans shouldn't draft him, and that's your opinion on him. So I want everybody to know that. You should read the article, but that's basically what it's about. Okay, so we can transition from that. JT, I have some things I've been radicalized on. I want to share them with you.
Okay. I would love to say, I mean, now it is your turn for me to say that you are crazy and all these players stink.
I wanted to make sure you're ready for this. So
I'm ready.
So I'm going to start with just some potpourri of things that aren't Titan specific, just general draft thoughts. I want to get them on record. It is 5:07 p.m. Central Standard Time on April 2nd, so I can point back to this when I am wrong or right when it comes to the draft at the end of the month. Number 1, Drake May is the second quarterback off the board in this class. We said this on the mock draft show last week. I had a couple hours session worth of mowing my parents' lawn, who I love. I'm like AJ Dillon, who plays like Farming Simulator, but in real life, like I just love to mow. So I did it when I was high school and in college. I would go back and do it when I was in town, and uh, I live near my parents, and so my dad's like, I don't want to mow. I'm like, I'm happy to, so I did that, and just I gather my thoughts, and I came away from that couple hours outdoors driving in circles, and I said, I'm pretty confident now that it's going to be Drake May. I think that the smoke screen is just that. I think it's a smoke screen. I think that there's a player in every draft that we overthink every single year. This year, that player is Drake May. He is the second best quarterback. He will be the second quarterback off the board with an absolute floor of third. I would be shocked if he falls, genuinely shocked. And I think if he does, the NFL is wrong about him. Number 2. Olafashinu. I'm not quite here on this yet, but we were talking, you, me, and Stoney and Zach were discussing this. I think folks may be overthinking him as well. The idea that, hey, listen, a lot of this college season, he was tackle 1. Joe Alt was not in the picture for that number 1 tackle spot. He was the presumed number 1 tackle in the league. And then he dealt with some things, and Joe Alt had a fantastic year. And so he then became, okay, he's tackle 2, but in some people's eyes, it's kind of a either or at the beginning of the draft season. Now it's firmly Joe Alt, consensus number 1. Olafashinu falls in that group with the next like 5 guys, and some people have him as their tackle 5, tackle 6. He's good, but is he the clear 2? I could be convinced he's the clear 2. I'm not saying this with as much chest this time. That's where I'm at on him. I'm close to being radicalized on Olafashinu. He's the second best tackle in this class. You're overthinking it. Number 3 is random, but we're big fans of this guy. Max Melton, man. I see his name on my timeline a couple times a day, every single day. The secret's out on Max Melton. I think he's a lock to go day 2. I think if you are still mocking him to the Titans at 108 in the 4th round or whatever it is, you're fooling yourself. I think that he is gone on the second day of the draft pretty clearly. I think he's awesome, and I think teams know it.
And this is the second year in a row that the first player I've talked to in any of my draft circles has not only become one of my favorite players, but is one of these guys that just skyrockets upwards. Last year it was Jack Campbell. He ends up shocking people player and going in a first round. Yeah. The first guy I talked to this year, Max Melton, and he goes.
So you're saying Max Melton, 18th overall pick? That's gonna be the shocker.
I mean, it may be this year. I'm gonna, as we watched draft day, I'm gonna write it on my post-it note this year. Max Melton, no matter what. I'm so much with you on that one. He's a good player. I think he has the traits. He just needs to put it all together. But I think he is he's got everything. He's one of my favorite players in this draft, and I think that he will be good at the next level.
All right, those are my positive radicalizations. Here's a negative one. Keon Coleman. I was a defender of Keon Coleman for a while. In my heart, I still am holding out hope. But in my brain, I am with folks on this idea that, man, aside from just watching his tape and saying that boy nice, there's not a whole lot to write home about on Keon Coleman. And that's concerning. And I think for that reason, he's going to fall a good deal. Like, I think that he is a clear outside the top 50 picks, maybe even a round 3 guy. I'm not quite ready to say he's going to fall to day 3 and be a 4th rounder, but would it shock me at this point? No, I think at that point he'd be a valuable pick, but this is all on the heels of, or even at the combine, saying, man, wouldn't be shocked if Keon Coleman is a sneaky first round, 28th overall, 30th overall, sneaks into that first round. That dream is dead. That dream has sailed. That ship is gone. It's sunk to the bottom of the ocean.
Welcome. Thank you. You've gone through the Keon Coleman 5 stages of grief, like many people have. You finally reached acceptance, and that's okay.
I'm just glad I'm here before draft day, and I'm not still talking like a crazy man about him on the actual draft live streams we do. Okay, last one is actually, that was all just fodder to lead us up to the last Titans take I have today, and then we'll get out of here. JT, and we were talking about this earlier today. Here's the overarching thought on the Titans draft I have. This is the number one thing I want to share going into this last month of us talking about the draft on this show and in Titan circles. I am confident that this is the case, and it's going to define the way that I talk about them for the next 3 weeks. No matter how I look at the Titans draft situation, I am consistently coming back to the same conclusion. Sticking at 7 And at 38 overall, and not adding an additional top 100 pick makes it really difficult to come away with the super satisfying haul. And maybe more importantly for me, it feels like a missed opportunity for them at this phase in their stage, this phase of their team building stage. And let me elaborate on that. We talked during the mock draft episode last week about how the Cardinals at number 4 overall in this year's draft, they're a team that you wouldn't be shocked to see trade back because they did it last year, and former Titans front office personnel now with the Cardinals as the GM, Monty Ossenfort. He's a wheeler and dealer, man. He's a guy that wants to move around and is not afraid to work the phones. Had an awesome video of him coming out today from last year's draft where he traded back, then traded back up, and they got their guy in Paris Johnson Jr. Who's to say he won't do it again? And fair, who's to say he won't do it again? But what he's done a lot in his first calendar year of being the GM of the Cardinals is acquire quantity, get picks, get future capital. We're rebuilding here. It's time to admit that to ourselves and address our off seasons under that umbrella. But in my last mock, me having them sticking at 4, picking Marvin Harrison Jr., the justification there comes a point in every rebuild where you have to switch from quantity to quality. The Titans picking at 7 and 38 to me would be focusing on quality. And I just don't think they're at that point quite. I think they're a one off season away from being the quality guys as opposed to the quantity guys. And when you do a mock draft, JT, I'm sure you've run into the same thing. Man, if you're picking at 7 and 38 and then not again until in the 100s, you just aren't able to address the Titans' needs in a super meaningful way, right? Because you address tackle at 7, right? You go Joe Alt or another tackle that's available in the first round. First round, you go tackle. Then it becomes, okay, your next impact player is coming at 38. And that's really all you can bank on, because at 108, you're not finding a guy that's going to be a day one impact player necessarily. It's rare that you do so. And so it becomes, okay, you go tackle first. Okay, then you go edge. Okay, what about the linebacker position? What about the defensive line? What about the receiver position you want to get younger at? Okay, well, maybe we go receiver in the second round. First of all, I'm not crazy about those options at the top of the second round. I kind of like the third and the late second and the early third options more in that regard. Okay, and if you just receiver, then really your defense is going to struggle, because then you got like a day 3 pair of linebackers, pair of defensive players that are going to rush the passer, a day 3 safety, a bunch of developmental guys. If you go receiver first or edge in the first round, then you feel like you have to go tackle in the second round, and that's not a shoebox you want to jam yourself into, because not only are first round tackles where it's at in terms of the tackle market, but you're going to have to force the issue and probably overdraft a guy for need, as opposed to letting a guy in terms of value fall to you position agnostic in that way. So those are just like, that's where my brain is at. And I'm curious, do you feel the same way? And when you do Titans mocks at this stage of the game, are you left feeling, man, here's the ultimate point, right? Throughout the draft season so far, January, February, March, my thought was, boy, it sure would be nice for them to add another top 100 pick. And I'm at the point now, in terms of radicalizing myself in this draft for the Titans, I'm saying it's not a sure it would be nice situation. It's a they sure need to do this. They need another top 100 pick, another day 2 pick somewhere, whether that means trading back in the first, trading back in the second, or trading other assets to get another pick there. This is a really talented day 1, day 2 of a draft class, a really rich group. And for a team like this, where they need a lot of different guys, they need to focus on that quantity over the quality.
And I think that's the thing that we said all along. We knew from the get-go, as we started evaluating this class, we knew that day 2 was going to be where the value was, because there's just so many good players. So I'm with you. When I'm doing mock drafts and when I'm just playing around with it sometimes, well, one, I like to trade back and get picks because I like drafting players that I like, that I think are really good.
Sure.
But also, when doing it as seriously as you can, you start to realize that maybe taking a wide receiver and a tackle with 7 and 38, and then realizing that you're going to probably have to start either an Otis Reese or a round 4 pick from day 1 at the inside linebacker or the defensive tackle or edge position, that becomes a real concern. So I think that as they've talked about it this offseason, They're always open to options. Not a lot of teams have been nosy, whether that is a smokescreen or not. That's something that we'll start to see more of as we get closer to the draft.
Well said. I think it's going to do it for us today. Before we go, just a reminder, a couple articles out from JT and I already. My mock draft 1.0 came out on Monday, full first round plus a 7-round Titans mock draft. Earlier today, JT's article talking about why Malik Neighbors at 7 for the Titans could be a gamble they should not take. And then later this week, we got I think tomorrow morning, we'll have JT's Titans mock 1.0, where he goes through all 7 rounds of the Titans draft. And I believe we've also got another draft-related piece from Justin Mello later in the week as well. So ramping up our written content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. Check that out. We will be back. Our next show will be on Thursday. JT, I believe we're going to dive into our first positional series episode. What position? I do not know yet. D-Good saying, congrats to those who hammered the over on 57.5 minutes. Yes, indeed. We tend to go long when we get into draft season. We just can't help it. But the draft coverage demands it. So on Thursday, we'll be talking about a position or two in our positional rankings videos. That is TBD, but we will be here in the 4 o'clock hour on Thursday afternoon. So join us then. Make sure you're subbed on YouTube, Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. Hit subscribe for us. It really is the best way you can help support this show, as well as subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy the podcast version of this show on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, on Stitcher, or wherever other weird podcast platform you get it. Check that out as well. And then follow us at Hot Read Pod on all of our social media accounts, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. That's at Hot Read Pod everywhere on social media. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Eastn Freeze. We'll talk to you on Thursday.